You're at a party, and someone walks up to you, a person you've met 3 times before. Their face is completely familiar. You remember the conversation you had about their trip to Spain. You can picture where they work, but their name has vanished into thin air, leaving you stammering through an awkward greeting while your brain desperately searches for something that should be right there. We usually blame this on a bad memory, on stress, on getting older. But what if I told you that forgetting names isn't random at all? What if the names that escape you are precisely the ones your mind wants to forget, and the reasons have nothing to do with memory weakness and everything to do with hidden thoughts you're trying to avoid? In 1898, Sigmund Freud analyzed his own embarrassing moment of forgetting an artist's name, and what he discovered was disturbing. Your mind isn't just forgetting, it's actively hiding something from you, and the substitute names that pop up in place of the real one are clues to what you're trying to repress. Freud was traveling through Herzegovina when he wanted to mention the magnificent frescoes in the Orvieto Cathedral. He knew exactly which artist he meant. He could picture the artwork perfectly. But the name Signorelli completely disappeared from his mind. Instead, 2 other names pushed their way forward, Botticelli and Boltraffio. He knew immediately these were wrong, yet they kept appearing, insisting on themselves even as his conscious mind rejected them. This wasn't just a simple memory failure. Something strange was happening, something that followed rules he didn't yet understand. Most psychologists at the time would have said that proper names are just harder to remember than other words, that they're arbitrary labels without meaning. But Freud refused to accept that explanation. He sensed that the replacement names weren't random, that they held a secret connection to the name he couldn't recall. When Freud examined what he'd been thinking about just before he forgot Signorelli, he found something unsettling. He'd been discussing Turkish customs with his traveling companion, specifically how Turkish patients accept death with resignation, saying to their doctors, "Sir, what can I say? If he could be saved, you would save him." But Freud had stopped himself from mentioning a second story about these same patients, one about how they value sexual pleasure above everything and fall into despair when they experience sexual problems, saying, "Sir, if that ceases, life no longer has any charm." He'd censored this story because it seemed inappropriate for conversation with a stranger. But there was something deeper he was avoiding, a painful memory from a few weeks earlier about a patient who had taken his own life due to an untreatable sexual disorder. Freud had deliberately pushed this tragedy out of his thoughts. What does it mean when the things we refuse to think about start controlling what we can and cannot remember? If you are new to this channel, please subscribe and turn on bell notification. This helps spread the knowledge to others. Freud laid out all the pieces like a detective examining evidence. The repressed theme contained words, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Herr, which means sir, and Trafoi, the place connected to his patient's death. The forgotten name Signorelli could be broken into parts. Signor means sir in Italian, the same meaning as Herr in German. The Elli ending appeared intact in Botticelli. The substitute names weren't random at all. They were fragments and echoes of both what he was trying to remember and what he was trying to forget, twisted together in his unconscious mind. His brain had performed an elaborate trick, taking pieces of the forbidden thought and pieces of the desired name and scrambling them into false names that his conscious mind would reject, but that his unconscious mind insisted upon. The forgetting wasn't a failure of memory, it was a success of repression. But why would the mind go to such lengths to hide a name just because it connects to an uncomfortable thought? What Freud discovered was that your unconscious mind doesn't distinguish between what you want to forget and what just happens to be associated with it. When you actively suppress a thought, when you push something out of consciousness because it's too painful or inappropriate or disturbing, that act of repression creates a kind of blank spot in your mind. And anything that's connected to the repressed thought, even loosely, even accidentally, gets pulled into that blank spot too. Signorelli had nothing to do with death, or sexuality, or Freud's patient. But the sound of the name, the context in which it appeared, the associations it triggered, these were enough to link it to the forbidden thought. So when Freud tried to recall the name, His mind blocked it to protect him from remembering what he didn't want to remember. The substitutes that appeared were compromise formations, names that satisfied both the desire to remember and the desire to forget, containing pieces of both but being neither. Daniel Schachter, a modern memory researcher, identified what he calls the 7 sins of memory. Different ways our memory systems fail us. One of these is blocking, when you know something but can't access it, the famous tip-of-the-tongue phenomenon. Schachter's research shows that blocking happens more often with proper names than with other words, and it increases with age and stress. But his explanation is different from Freud's. Schachter sees blocking as a retrieval failure, a problem with accessing stored information, not as motivated forgetting. The memory trace is there, but weakened, or competing memories interfere with finding the right one. For Schachter, forgetting is usually a flaw in the system, not a purposeful act. But what if both are true? What if sometimes we forget because the system is imperfect, and sometimes we forget because part of us wants to? Freud insisted that his case wasn't unique, that this pattern of motivated forgetting happens constantly, but we don't notice it because we don't analyze our slips carefully. He began collecting examples from his own life and from patients. Again and again, he found the same structure. A name disappears. Wrong names appear in its place. When you trace the associations, you find a repressed thought lurking nearby, something the person wanted to avoid thinking about. The forgotten name got caught in the gravitational field of the repression and was pulled down into unconsciousness along with the forbidden content. And the substitute names, when decoded, always contained clues pointing toward both the missing name and the hidden thought. Your mind is always telling you what you're trying not to know, but it speaks in a code of slips and substitutions and symptoms that you have to learn to read. But Freud went further. He said that even when substitute names don't appear spontaneously, you can bring them to the surface by concentrating, by paying close attention to what comes to mind when you try to remember. Those forced substitutes show the same patterns of association as the spontaneous ones. This suggested to him that the difference between forgetting with substitutes and forgetting without them isn't a difference in kind, but in degree. In some cases, the associations are strong enough to push wrong names into consciousness. In other cases, they're weaker, so nothing appears, but the same mechanism of repression is operating underneath. Not every instance of forgetting a name involves repression, Freud admitted. Sometimes you forget simply because the name didn't encode well, or too much time has passed, or you're tired. But he believed that far more forgetting than we realize is motivated, driven by unconscious wishes to avoid certain thoughts. How often are you forgetting things that your conscious mind wants to remember, but your unconscious mind needs to hide? The idea that forgetting could be motivated was revolutionary and deeply unsettling. It suggested that you don't have full control over your own mind, that there's a part of you working against your conscious intentions, hiding information from you for reasons you can't access. When you forget someone's name, you probably feel frustrated with yourself, blaming your memory or your attention. But Freud would ask, what don't you want to think about? What painful or inappropriate or threatening association might this person or their name trigger? The forgetting is protecting you from something, even as it embarrasses you and makes social situations awkward. Your unconscious is choosing psychological safety over social smoothness, and it makes that choice automatically, without asking permission from your conscious self. Elizabeth Loftus, who revolutionized our understanding of memory, showed that memories aren't fixed recordings, but reconstructions that can be altered and distorted. Her research on false memories demonstrated that people can be led to remember entire events that never happened, suggesting that memory is far more malleable and unreliable than we'd like to believe. But Loftus focused on how external influences, leading questions, suggestions from others, can create false memories. Freud was interested in how internal influences, your own wishes and fears and conflicts, shape what you remember and forget. Both recognize that memory isn't a passive recording device. It's an active process influenced by motivation, emotion, and current psychological needs. The difference is in where they located the source of distortion, outside or inside the mind. Freud's analysis revealed something fascinating about how the unconscious mind works with language. It doesn't respect the meaning of words. It treats them as sounds and syllables that can be broken apart and recombined. Signorelli became signor plus elli. Signor connected to hair through meaning, both meaning sir. Hair connected to Herzegovina through sound. Herzegovina and Bosnia connected to Boltrafio and Botticelli through their initial sounds. The whole chain of associations was partly semantic, based on meaning, and partly acoustic, based on sound. Your unconscious doesn't think in logical sentences. It thinks in associations, in chains of connection that jump from meaning to sound, to visual similarity, to emotional resonance. This is why dreams are so strange, and why slips of the tongue reveal things you didn't mean to say. The unconscious is constantly processing language in ways that bypass rational thought. What about the people whose names you forget? Freud's theory suggests that the forgetting might not be about them at all, or it might be very much about them in ways you're not consciously aware of. Maybe someone's name reminds you of a painful experience. Maybe their face resembles someone you'd rather not think about. Maybe they trigger feelings of attraction or hostility that you need to suppress. Maybe their name sounds like something embarrassing or forbidden. The associations can be incredibly indirect, threading through memories and emotions in ways that would never occur to your conscious mind. When you meet them again and their name vanishes, you think you just have a bad memory for names. But your unconscious is making a calculated move, protecting you from something it has decided you shouldn't access. Carl Jung, who eventually broke with Freud, developed his own theory of the unconscious that was less focused on repression and more on symbolism and archetypes. Jung used word association tests to map the unconscious, asking people to respond quickly to a list of words and timing their responses. When people hesitated or gave unusual responses, Jung believed he'd hit upon a complex, an emotionally charged set of associations that disrupted normal thinking. Freud would have seen these complexes as repressed material trying to break through. Jung saw them as autonomous parts of the psyche with their own energy and purpose. But both agreed on something fundamental, that what happens on the surface of consciousness, the words we say, the names we forget, reveals deeper patterns operating below awareness. Your slips aren't accidents. They're messages from a part of yourself you don't usually hear from. The practical implications of Freud's discovery are both useful and uncomfortable. On one hand, you can use your forgetting as a tool for self-understanding. When you forget something, especially when you keep forgetting the same thing repeatedly, you can ask yourself what associations it might have. What does this person remind me of? What was I thinking about before I tried to remember this? What thoughts am I trying to avoid? The substitutes that appear, the wrong names that pop into your head, are breadcrumbs leading back to the hidden thought. Following those breadcrumbs might reveal something about yourself you didn't know, or something you knew but were avoiding. On the other hand, this is uncomfortable because it means your mind is keeping secrets from you, and some of those secrets might be things you don't want to discover. Freud believed that bringing unconscious material into consciousness was therapeutic, that symptoms appeared when mental energy got trapped by repression, and that releasing that energy through awareness could eliminate symptoms. This is why psychoanalysis involves talking about everything that comes to mind, no matter how random or embarrassing it seems. The associations you make, the things you forget, the slips you commit, all of these are doors into the unconscious. By following those doors, by tracing the connections, you can discover what you've been hiding from yourself and why. The name you forgot isn't important in itself. What's important is what the forgetting reveals about your inner conflicts, your hidden wishes, your unacknowledged fears. Every mistake your mind makes is actually a success for your unconscious, which is constantly working to keep you from thoughts it is deemed too dangerous or painful to face. But there's a question Freud's theory raises that he never fully answered. If repression is supposed to protect you from painful thoughts, why does it work so badly? If your mind wants to hide something, why does it leave all these clues, the substitute names, the slips of the tongue, the symptoms? Why not just bury the thought completely and be done with it? The answer seems to be that complete repression is almost impossible. The repressed thought has energy, it wants expression, and it finds ways to push through in disguised forms. The substitute names aren't failures of repression, they're partial successes of the repressed thought, which manages to assert itself by encoding its presence in the very mistake that's supposed to hide it. You end up with a compromise where nothing is fully expressed and nothing is fully hidden, a state of perpetual tension between what wants to be known and what wants to stay secret. Modern neuroscience has complicated Freud's picture without entirely disproving it. Brain imaging studies show that memory retrieval involves multiple systems working together, and that emotional content affects how memories are stored and accessed. The amygdala, which processes emotion, can strengthen or interfere with hippocampal memory formation. Stress hormones affect consolidation. Attention determines what gets encoded in the first place. All of this suggests that emotion and motivation do influence memory, though perhaps not in exactly the way Freud described. The unconscious he imagined, a cauldron of repressed desires and forbidden thoughts, doesn't map neatly onto brain structures. But the basic insight, that what you remember and forget is influenced by emotional and motivational factors operating outside awareness, has been confirmed again and again. Your memory isn't neutral. It serves your psychological needs, even when that means hiding things from you. What Freud discovered in his forgotten name was a window into how the mind protects itself, how it manages contradictions and conflicts by keeping incompatible thoughts separated. You can't simultaneously think about a painful memory and enjoy a casual conversation. So your mind makes a choice. It sacrifices the name you wanted to recall to preserve your emotional equilibrium. It accepts a moment of social awkwardness to avoid a moment of psychological pain. And it does this so smoothly, so automatically, that you never notice the choice being made. You just experience the result, a blank space where a name should be, a feeling of frustration, a scramble to cover your embarrassment. Meanwhile, deep below consciousness, your mind is congratulating itself on successfully protecting you from something you didn't even know you needed protection from. The challenge, once you understand this mechanism, is deciding what to do with the knowledge. You could ignore your forgetting, dismiss it as meaningless, accept the standard explanation that proper names are just hard to remember. Or you could pay attention to the pattern, notice what you forget and when, follow the associations to see where they lead. You might discover uncomfortable things about yourself, thoughts you've been avoiding, feelings you haven't acknowledged, connections you didn't want to see. But you might also find relief in understanding, in bringing to light what's been operating in darkness. Freud believed that the unconscious mind, left to itself, creates symptoms and suffering. But when its contents are made conscious, when you can look directly at what you've been hiding from, the symptoms lose their power. The name that kept vanishing might suddenly become easy to remember once you've acknowledged why you were avoiding it. Freud's analysis of forgetting proper names was just the beginning of a much larger project, mapping the ways unconscious thoughts influence conscious behavior. He would go on to analyze slips of the tongue, bungled actions, jokes, dreams, neurotic symptoms, all seen as communications from the unconscious mind using its own peculiar language. The forgetting of names was important because it was common, minor, something everyone experiences, yet it revealed the same mechanisms that create serious psychological problems. If your unconscious can hide a name from you to protect you from an uncomfortable association, what else might it be hiding? What memories, what desires, what truths about yourself has it decided you're not ready to handle? Your mind is not a unified thing working toward a single goal. It's a battlefield where different forces compete for control, and what you experience as your conscious self is only one of those forces, often weaker than it wants to believe. The forgotten name is a small thing, a moment of embarrassment at a party, a blank in a conversation. But in that small thing, Freud saw the entire structure of the human mind laid bare, desire and defense, conscious and unconscious, meaning and disguise all tangled together. Every time you reach for a name that isn't there, every time a wrong name appears in its place, your mind is telling you a story about itself. The question is whether you're willing to listen to what it's saying, to decode the message hidden in your mistakes, to acknowledge the thoughts you've been working so hard to avoid. Because once you understand that forgetting isn't random, that your mind is always choosing what to show you and what to hide, you can never look at your own thoughts quite the same way again. What will you discover about yourself in the next name you forget? If you enjoyed this exploration of Freud's analysis of forgetting and the hidden workings of the unconscious mind, please like this video and share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever noticed patterns in what you forget, or found that certain names or words consistently escape you? What do you think those forgettings might be trying to tell you? I'd love to hear your experiences. If you are new to this channel, please subscribe so you can continue learning about the fascinating and sometimes disturbing insights psychology offers into how our minds really work.